Welcome, everyone, to episode 4 of the MBE Enterprise Podcast, where we talk about money, business, and entrepreneurship with some of the brightest minds I know. Today, I am joined by Chad Tjugum, entrepreneurship major and founder of RaritiesMarket. Chad, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing amazing. Thank you for asking. Anytime I get to do one of these podcasts with somebody, I'm super excited, and I'm really looking forward to this one especially. So, Chad, I think the first thing I want to ask you today is kind of where's RaritiesMarket at? Explain to the listeners kind of what that is, what it's all about, why you wanted to start it. Kind of take me back to the origins of RaritiesMarket as a whole.
Yeah, so RaritiesMarket started about a year and a half ago now, just sort of out of ambition to do something a little bit different. I've been sort of creating businesses since I was, like 8 years old, and um, I've been buying and selling collectible coins for the last maybe 7 or so, and I sort of got like not sick of it, but doing something like just like buying and selling stuff over and over again, it gets really repetitive. And at the end of the day, you're not really solving any real problems and you're not really creating anything. So RaritiesMarket was my attempt at creating real value, a real business, and something that could really, scale. So it started off as a way for people to buy ultra rare and expensive coins, collectible coins. And basically, we were going to be taking expensive coins that maybe would cost $50,000 a rep, typically only available to the ultra rich, and basically allow anyone to buy into these coins fractionally, just like they would with stocks. And so that lasted about 6 months. I ended up creating the company after sort of like ideating off of it for a while and just throwing it around. I pitched it in a pitch competition in October of 2022. And that's sort of when it became real for me. I also went through an accelerator program, and it really held me accountable to actually pursuing the idea. And so through pitching it and iterating on it, I went from the fractional investing platform, which itself was, I think, a really good idea. A lot of people were really interested in it. It just wasn't super feasible in terms of the development costs, the legal and compliance costs, as you can imagine. And so I decided to get to market faster, that I wanted to pivot into something else. And that then brought us to a marketplace, which I pitched at a couple other competitions, ended up doing pretty well in. And that gave us some extra funding and encouragement to continue with the business. And throughout the summer, this last summer, I had a lot of time to reflect on what we were building. We actually got pretty far into what we were building from like technology side. And so we got to start showing our users, the product and getting feedback from them. And from doing that, I actually realized that one of the features that we were pushing out with our product as a whole, which at that point was more of a database for coins, was getting a lot of attention. And I posted it on Facebook to a group of coin collectors that I had known from buying and selling coins. And they were all really, not all, we had like 20 or so people that were really interested in this small feature that we had just built out. So now what we're basically doing is we're running with that momentum full speed ahead, and we're building software tools for small businesses to allow them to better manage their inventories, to help them with their data analytics and to grow their business. And we're starting with those coin collectors and coin dealers, and we're hoping that as we raise some money and grow the business, that we can really bring this to what I've been doing, my whole life, which is reselling things and help people like myself grow their business.
Awesome. Yeah. So when you talk about those businesses within kind of that coin collecting space, I'm someone who is totally new, totally newbie level when it comes to everything in that category. Essentially, could you kind of describe to people a little bit more in depth kind of what some of those businesses might do in that coin collecting space or coin transactional space, and just kind of describe the whole space in general a little bit?
Yeah, so what I usually do to give some context for coin collecting is I'd say, think of your grandpa. Think of the wheat pennies he might have in his cupboard. It's basically just the collecting, the action of collecting physical coins, like money you would spend maybe 100 years ago. And there's a surprisingly large market of a couple million coin collectors in the United States. And, they're just collecting like pennies from, maybe 1915 or something. Old antique and, unique coins. And the businesses typically that exist within the coin and other collectible markets are more one-off, just sort of like small teams buying and selling items. They're buying from collectors, they're marking them up, and then selling to collectors. And that's typically how those industries work. And there's thousands of these dealers, but there's not a lot of technology, and that's sort of the gap that we wanted to fill.
Can you take me through a little bit more the technological aspects of your company in particular, kind of what maybe went into developing some of the technologies that you're using both now and maybe going forward?
Yeah, so I'm actually not the developer on our project. I wish I had that experience, and I'm actually trying to learn that. And I think that's a really valuable tool for anyone that wants to have a tech business that we could talk about later. But I got lucky with a referral and was able to find another student at a local school who's actually pretty good at web development. So I brought him on in January. He started building up this platform sort of on the side for us while we were trying to make our, work on the business stuff. And he did a really good job building that out. And we've since built out a platform at raritiesvalue.com. If anyone wants to just like check it out, even if you're not a coin collector, it might give you some context for what we're doing. But we basically have an inventory management system right now where collectors or coin dealers can enter the items that they have for sale or in their inventory sort of into like a spreadsheet view. And we basically think of it like a spreadsheet that has, maybe a one-up on traditional spreadsheets. Like we have ways to track different cells, and we're working on formulas to create advanced reporting. Eventually want to make it where dealers can actually go in there and record their sales. And so that's sort of the technology that we're building right now. I think there's a lot of ways we could take it in the future, whether we want to focus on, the coin technology itself, which is typically what we had focused on in, the months past, or if we want to do more of like a small business, software company. But, there's a bunch of different ways we can take it. And I guess we're just, as far as like the future technology is concerned, we're mostly just going to look for what our customers really want.
For sure. And for those wondering, the monetization side of your business, how do you charge the businesses? What are you charging for them to simply use your platform? Are you taking a percentage of every transaction? Kind of give me some insights into how that's sort of working, at least for now.
Yeah, so we started off, we've sort of been through about all of them at this point, trying to figure out what fits best into our business model. We started off with a transactional model, trying to take when we were doing the marketplace and the fractional investing idea, our goal was to take a percentage on every transaction, but we found that this might not be super viable just because the items are typically really expensive. And as a result, the coin dealers or coin sellers, I should say, they typically work on a really small margin. They might make 5 or 10%. And so charging them, a 5 or 10% sales price or commission fee just isn't quite going to work. So our idea now is to charge a monthly recurring fee. We're sort of yet to determine what that price is going to be, but something that's affordable to small resellers.
For sure. So essentially, the plan is that RaritiesMarket would turn into kind of like the Amazon marketplace for rare coins. Is my kind of understanding that correctly? Like that would be the place that people would go to do any buying and selling of that, or am I understanding that not quite right?
Yeah, I think that's one way we could take it. It really depends. I think the other way we could look at it is like, and this is sort of more of where I'm shifting. You're definitely right in saying that's sort of, I think, more of what we were doing. I think now where I'm at mentally is more of like a QuickBooks for people that might not have the time or the expertise in accounting to really learn QuickBooks. And a solution that's really tailored to help manage the business more so than being involved in the transactional piece. But we could certainly, I think, take it to more marketplace. It's just we'll see what our customers and users really determine they want.
Gotcha. I love that perspective, by the way, of just basing it off of, I mean, as you know, what the customer wants, because they ultimately are their everything, right? So I think that's extremely smart. And the fact that you're looking at that right away and have that frame of mind is definitely a good stepping stone to start. One thing you also mentioned is that you have that developer that joined forces with you right away. And that's actually one of the questions I kind of wanted to get into with you is the idea of solopreneur versus building a team or having a partnership with somebody going forward. Could I get some of your thoughts on just maybe the plus sides of both of those, the downsides of both of them, and then kind of where you see yourself at, obviously on the team side to start, but
Yeah, so I've had a number of businesses, as I mentioned earlier, and they've historically just been me. Um, Small one person businesses, I think, kind of makes up probably most small businesses. I don't have any facts to back that up, but at least from the people I talk to in our age level, hiring people really isn't a thought, and a lot of times it's more so from a financial resource perspective. It's expensive to hire people and to retain them, and that's something that I've learned over the last year. But I totally think it's worth it. But I also think it sort of depends, like, on your goals. Um, there's nothing wrong with just having a one-person business and making a certain amount of money. Like, you can make six figures with a one-person business. Um, not that difficult if you find a market and can scale it right. But if you really want to create something that's really large, I think, and you know, like massive impact, I think you have to get a team. And what hiring my first employees has taught me is that you don't have to be the best at anything if you're an entrepreneur. If you can find someone who's good at what they do, like for example, our developer is a million times better than me at making websites. I could never. I shouldn't say that. I'm trying to learn how, but where I'm at now, I wouldn't even know how to approach it. I don't have to be a developer to have a technology startup, and I'm realizing that you know I can kind of just lead people in a direction, and as long as I hire the right people, I can get top talent or top results by having a team. So that's sort of my long way of saying I think it's totally valid to have a one person business. I run a one person business with a part time employee, and it's for all intents and purposes it's a one person business. But this new technology startup that I have is giving me perspective into actually growing a team and scaling a team. And now that's definitely where my ambition lies.
so one of the things you brought up there was impact. If you really want to have a large scale impact, hiring employees helps you get to that point quicker. Um, is there a specific impact that you would like to make on the world? Is there a specific end goal you have with this? And does that tie into why you got started with Rarities Market, the coin market in particular?
Yeah, I'm not sure how deep you want me to go into like the philosophy of everything that I think, but um, I was pretty lucky to have some business success as a teenager, and I think having that has sort of given me a perspective that you know I think I'm capable of doing some pretty cool things in my life, and eventually I'm gonna die, and eventually everything that I've worked for I can't work on anymore, and I'm a bit of a workaholic, so I really just want to see how far I can get, what I can create, um, and leaving an impact, with a bigger business or a bigger idea is really something that I'm trying to learn right now. And how do I think bigger? How do I scale my ideas? And how do I, go from just buying and selling coins to changing, a $4 billion rare coin industry?
You also brought up the fact, Chad, that you are kind of a workaholic. You mentioned that side business that you have going right now. How do you balance kind of your main time gig with RaritiesMarket, and then also that side business. And what is that side business?
Yeah, so I buy and sell coins on the side, and I have for the last like 7 years or so. And I do that in addition to obviously Rarities Market and trying to build new technologies. And it is definitely a challenge. That business is still doing pretty well. We get pretty good amount of volume, order volume. Um, it's slowed down a bit since I've tried to focus more of my time on Rarities Market, but it still takes up probably like 15 or 20 hours a week. I would estimate at least. And there was a point not too long ago before I got into it that I was working 80 plus hours a week, every single week for months on end. And through doing that, I really realized, honestly, that like less is more, and that the life balance part to me is so much more important. And oddly enough, I've actually been more productive with my businesses, and I made more money working less because I can just see like a 30,000 foot view of what's happening. And instead of working in my business, I can work on my business. So I think this is something that entrepreneurs are always going to struggle with. I struggle with it all the time. I probably will never crack the code, but I find that prioritizing your work life balance and really like focusing on what really matters in your life while also being mindful that you have a business. And I just feel like that has been so beneficial to me, just in terms of being able to see the world like bigger. If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I have to ask, going on that, have you read the book? I don't know if you are a big avid reader or not, but have you read the
Trying to be.
book? Have you ever read the book The 4 Hour Work Week by
Yes.
Tim Ferriss?
That's like, so I should work more, or I should read more. I should not work more. I should read more. But that's actually like one of the few books in the last couple of years that I've actually had the time to sit down and read through. And that's probably where a lot of my mindset has come from. That is a great book. I love the philosophy of it. I don't think I'm ever going to work a 4 hour work week, but the principles of, you know, really like stepping aside. And it was a while ago since I actually read the book, so hopefully I have a good explanation for it. But if I remember correctly, it's like focus more on what's important, and the work itself can kind of be scaled, and like it focuses on like the 80/20 principle, right? And the amount of just like decisions I made actually based on the 80/20 principle, um, and that book, I guess, has been kind of amazing. Like over the last couple of years, it's significantly altered what I do and how I do things. And I mean, even this week, I've taken a look and said, um, these results, like I made for buying and selling coins, for example, I made probably most of the money that I'll make this month, just like flipping real quick wholesale transaction from, just like getting stuff in, moving it to a big dealer out west. I'll make more money from that transaction than if I were to work probably 160 hours, trying to just flip through stuff. So, yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I definitely think like the 80/20 principle in that book are worth a read. And if you start thinking through, that concept, I think you're able to scale a lot better. That's a theory I'm trying to work on for sure.
For sure. And could you actually describe the 80/20 principle just a little bit more in depth for any listeners that may
Yeah, for
not be
sure.
positive on what that is?
Yeah. So I hope I have this correct. Like I said, it's been a couple of years, but to my understanding, the 80/20 principle states that you basically get 80% of your results from 20% of your work. And so if, in my case, if I make, and I'm not going to give you the numbers, but if I make say $10 one month, I hope I make more than that, but eight of those dollars are coming from, maybe 10 hours of that work. My math's definitely off there, but the 30 hours that I'm working, then if I'm working a 40-hour work week, are then making me $2. And so it's more it's the principle is like, focus on scaling the, the 10 hours a week that's making you $8, and try to cut out or outsource the rest. And what that allows you to do is to grow your business, because having a business is really, there's some kind of mundane work, and it's not fun sometimes. Um, and a lot of times, I think entrepreneurs don't realize that, the bulk of like the results are coming from a really small number of things. I'm trying to be more aware of that in my own businesses, and it's made me a lot more money for sure.
Yeah, I think you did a great job of explaining that too for people who might have been wondering on that. And I've actually heard a lot of things recently as far as the people in the sales industry goes, talking about sort of that 80-20 principle. And in that case, it's like, okay, I've started a business centered around sales, whatever the product or the service is, the actual selling of it, right, is what matters. That's what makes you money.
Mm-hmm.
So after they've scaled it to, a serviceable size to the point where they can maybe start hiring employees, which is obviously a task in itself to get it to that level, um, then they get to the point where they sit down and think about, okay, what am I bringing that's actually extremely valuable? And what they might be best at is high end closing, for example. So actually closing the sales with their high end customers. And then you can start to think about it kind of with the 80-20 principle in mind of, okay, I'm going to outsource essentially everything else that goes on with this. And I'm going to spend that 20% of time hammering down and closing those high end customers that I have, because that's what really matters most for the company. And I've also heard Alex Hormozy, I mention him a lot on this podcast. I've heard him talk about when you build a business, you should be thinking at least partially about how you are going to be able to kind of get out of it, or how you will be working on it, like you mentioned, as opposed to working in it. Because I think that's something that my entrepreneurship journey over the last 6 months or so, and meeting a lot of new connections, has really taught me, is the idea of most people think an entrepreneur is going to start something and they are going to work on that particular thing until they die. And that might be the case for some people. But for other people that just have that entrepreneurial mindset and spirit and don't necessarily have a super passion or super love for their first business, and like, what industry that may actually be in, I think then it's really huge to know that, okay, you're going to want to scale this in 5 to 10 years, however long it may take, eventually sell out of it, and then start something new, because what you love is the game itself and not just the money that you're maybe bringing in. That might be part of it. But however, if you do not set up your organization in a way that maybe you are the face of the brand cannot exist without you, you put yourself in a position that you are unable to actually pivot out of it and move into something else and still be able to make the more passive income, maybe from overseeing things from afar. So I think that is definitely an interesting perspective to have on it as well. Now I want to go back a little bit. You talked about you being a workaholic and how you've shifted your mindset to more towards that 4-hour work week style. And for those of you wondering, the 4-hour work week is a book by Tim Ferriss. I'm actually only like 60, 70 pages into it right now. It's what I'm reading currently. But what you said, it was so true. Like, it stuck so hard to what that book actually is about. And it's like Chad said, it's essentially leveraging your time. It's big about leveraging your time to the point where you can get your requirement, your daily tasks, your work done in a quicker time frame, or outsource it to the point where you don't actually have to slave away doing it and then wait until your age. I know the big concept is waiting until you're 65, 70, 75 to retire and then enjoy your life, right? He talks about taking mini vacations throughout, where essentially this concept comes in is not so much having $1 million, but making 50,000 or, a solid salary in a shorter period of time, so that you can actually spend your time doing what you want outside of that 20% working. And then also the idea of freedom of physical space, not being tied down to an office, like getting your work to the point where you can do it while you're on the go, because then you are allowed to do things like travel while you're still making your money and you don't have to be sitting in that office space. But going back to this, you talked about how you were a workaholic and now you've shifted that mindset. Was it just that book that made you shift that mindset, or what are some of the things that kind of went into that? Go ahead and get a little philosophical here if you want, Chad. What are kind of some things that went into that mindset shift? Because frankly, it's contrary to what most people believe with entrepreneurship, that you have to be a workaholic, and maybe it's more efficient, maybe it's not, who knows, but it's a pretty big mindset shift to have as an entrepreneur going forward. So if you could explain that a little bit for us.
Yeah, I was very much, a couple of years ago, like during COVID, I graduated high school and I took a gap year to just work. And I was very much in the boat of, work all the time. And I said 80 hours. I was working every pretty much waking moment. Like I would work from the point I got up, um, to the point I went to bed, and 7 days a week too. And, I was miserable. I made a lot of money. Um, and that definitely helped me kind of move on with things in the future. But and I was miserable, and I really, at the end, created nothing of value. I was working a job. Um, I was too sort of in my business. I was grinding day to day, working on, getting packages in and out, processing inventory, listing items for sale. And, you know, I ended up just like shutting down that business because, it had no tangible value after I stopped working on it. And that taught me a lot about, how to maybe be an entrepreneur. And I don't want to, say that you can't work hard. I mean, you obviously you have to work hard as an entrepreneur. I mean, I'm always still working. My mind's always still on the businesses, but I think it's more about you know, like being intentional about your work. Um, if I'm working 40 hours a week and I'm doing it with a purpose, that is going to beat out, someone working 120 hours a week every single time. And I've proven that to myself, and that's why I believe that. I think that book definitely helped. Um, but intentionally working on what really matters within your business is, I think, how you scale. And so it's a concept that I'm trying to do more of. I would love to work 10 hours a week, and just like run a business from a cruise boat somewhere. And I think that's hopefully where I'm headed, and that I think it's totally possible too. It's about trying to think of your business, in terms of scale, um, and really just like continuously learning what works and what doesn't work for you. And 120 hours a week might work for someone. It doesn't work for me. And knowing that, I think, well, it could save everything. It could even save your life. It was not a great time for me. Um, and I learned a lot about myself and how, working from the moment I get up to the moment I go to bed, it's really toxic. And I could go down a rabbit hole with this, but I think it's something that, as young people who really want to get ahead, it's something that we need to work on. And it's something that we really need to be, cognizant of. Um, some people are built to work like that. But I think most people aren't. And finding some sort of like balance in your life is definitely more important, because at the end of the day, you could be the richest person in the world. 100 years, odds are maybe you're the richest person in the world. You could be the fifth richest person in the world. Odds are in 100 years, no one's going to remember you. So, enjoy life while you're here, I guess. And I mean, it's just work. It's really just work.
One concept I want to touch on there, and I essentially agree with everything you said there, that the idea of, and it's easy to say, right? Obviously, if you can work less and make the same amount of money, like, duh,
Right.
you're going to work
Yeah.
less, right? But what we're really talking about here is working 100-hour weeks to squeeze out a little bit more money just because it's a little bit more money, as opposed to understanding, okay, how many hours a week, like we said, the 80-20 rule, how many hours a week can I work and still live the level of life realistically that I want to live right now? And I think that's a big piece of it. But one thing I want to bring up with that, Chad, is how were you able, and perhaps answering for other entrepreneurs who maybe are not at that point yet, the monetization process. So, and actually going back further, the ideation process. So when you're coming up with a business idea or a business concept, there's differing views on whether you should charge for that right away, whether it's a service, give as much value as possible for free right away, to build loyalty, brand support. What I'm curious is what's kind of your thoughts on that? And it seems like you started out as more of a, I don't want to say it like this, but like almost you were the transaction man, like you were the middleman
Yeah.
kind of with some of
Yeah.
that stuff, like almost a drop shipper of rare coins, kind of in
Yeah.
a way.
No, I think that's fair.
Yeah. So that is a model that obviously monetizes right away. So say you were going and starting your next venture, but you were in the same position where you also are young and you didn't have the money thing figured out yet. Would you always attack it from the angle of monetizing right away, making some money right away? Or would you more try and play, the long game of like, okay, I might not get paid for the first 3 years. I might not make anything. I'm going to have to live broke. Cause I think that's where the grinding aspect comes in, is when people are not making any money yet, when they're trying to bootstrap that thing off bare ground, no financial backing really. I mean, there's some, but not much. So that's kind of the question I want to ask you. Would you always go for the monetize a little bit, get some income stream coming in early? And if that didn't seem feasible, would you pivot out of that? Would it, it depends on a lot of factors, obviously, but how would you kind of attack that going forward?
Yeah. So I think what was an important distinction, and maybe ask you kind of what exactly you mean. I can attack both, I think, angles of it first, and let me know if I left anything out for you. But I think it's important to distinguish between, what you're paying yourself as a business owner, and actually monetizing your business. I pay myself like, I'm making like McDonald's wages. If you really look at it, like that's what I'm paying myself for school, my apartment, my car. I'm living on like as little as possible to reinvest in my business. But my businesses, we're building them to be monetized as quickly as possible. I was talking to a developer today during our meeting, and I sort of, reiterated to him like, we want to build out, the actual process of creating, or creating a subscription on the user's account, like as soon as possible. If there was one thing that I could build out tomorrow, that would be it. Um, and I think any business, the goal of any business, if it wants to be successful, it depends on your budget. We can go into that too, but most businesses should try to get from no revenue to revenue as quickly as possible. They should try to sell, like what I learned it as is sell consistently, like sell at, at margin, and then sell at scale. So you want to you want to basically, try to make that first dollar as soon as possible. And then you want to prove and validate the business model and prove that you can sell that, more than once. And then you want to prove that you can sell it, at a point where you're actually making money. And then you want to try to grow it as much as possible. And so if you adopt that frame, sort of that mindset with your business, it makes your odds of success a lot higher. And one thing people will realize if they're in a business that takes a lot of capital to run, like a technology startup, you only have so much runway. And obviously that's like, how much money you have in the account before you're out of money. You only have so much of that before you got to either raise money or, throw in the towel. And if you're not monetizing, it's really difficult to raise money and it's really difficult to cover your expenses. So yeah, basically, I hope that answered that well for you. But I would say pay yourself as little as possible, but try to actually monetize the business as soon as possible, and as aggressively as possible. Unless, important distinction, you've raised a ton of money, or what you're doing, like this podcast, for example. I don't think it's super important for you to monetize it today or tomorrow. I think building up that process and that content and that library of videos in the past is way more important. But your expenses are, a lot lower naturally to run the business. So really figure out like how much money you have to work with, like model out your finances. It sucks, but you'll get a good grip of what you can afford to do as a business. And what you'll find out what options best for you.
Yeah, I think you answered that really well. That's kind of what I was getting at, is the idea of essentially getting to the point where you can make enough money to pay yourself and live and continue doing it. That's kind of what I mean, because there's some people out there like Alex Hormozy. I'll bring him up again, for example. One of the things he talks about is, over delivering right away, and that doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, but over delivering always, making your free stuff amazing, providing a ton of value for free, building that following, that base before you're actually monetizing. And it would depend partially on the industry, but it's like, I agree with that, and I think that is extremely effective for. He talks about the idea of the fact that you can 10x goodwill quicker than you can 10x profit, right? 10xing profit in a year would be pretty difficult. But if you can 10x the number of people that follow you and trust you and believe in your brand, then when you do monetize, you're essentially, if you take the same percentage of people that would buy, you're 10x from where you would have been. So he talks a lot about that. And I think the value proposition in that is, it does make sense. But another thing to factor in is the fact of, okay, how long can I actually go without making some money, without having some source of revenue or income coming in to the point where I can still keep doing it? And I think that's kind of what I was getting at the most, is that idea of, okay, I have this business idea. Like for yours, for example, I think you brought up a good point with this podcast. Just say, and the income isn't necessarily really the number one reason I'm doing this podcast, right? It's more for networking and just growth and following influence stuff in general, but also just learning. But it is something that obviously you'd be dumb not to want to grow it, and eventually monetize it. But it's just not phase one for it, versus something like flipping or something where you're making commissions, on every single one, and you are making money right away as soon as you start doing it. I think they're just, different business styles, obviously. And I guess my question to you, Chad, is how would you approach the first business style, the podcast type style, kind of the longer game of it? Then would you move back into, I mean, you'd maybe be forced to, right? But move back into that workaholic mindset, or kind of, what were some key qualities and skills that you used to get from the beginning, when you were making no money, to scaling to the point where you could at least pay yourself a McDonald's, a minimum wage salary type of thing to keep going?
Yeah. And I think it's really important to note at least that, everyone's story in business is different. What works for me is not going to work for most people. And, there's not like a one size fits all approach to this. And we do, by the way, we have built out a free version of our product, and that's really all we have at this point. But I think the mindset, if you're going to run a business and really treat something like a business, is getting to revenue as soon as possible is what matters. Your business is there to make money. Unless it's not, then it's a completely different story. But yeah, in terms of getting from nowhere to somewhere, 0 to 1, as they say in the startup world, that's the hardest part about business. I wouldn't say that I have figured it out myself. I've done it, but I was also doing it with a business model like reselling that's really quite easy to do. You just are essentially taking something, finding it, at a cheaper value than what it's worth, and then selling it. It's not super complicated. It's something that, it's pretty easy to get from 0 to 1 doing that. But if you're trying to do something like create a technology startup, the 0 to 1 game is a lot harder. And I guess I'll hopefully have a better insight on this in a couple of months, if we get there. But I would just say that that's the hardest part. Just try to figure out a way to make $1. Try to figure out a way to just do anything, to make anything, get to the next step, the next investor, the next connection, the next video if you're posting, and whatever the next step is. I think that's sort of the framework, and you'll build off that over time. And it's hard to see, like the big picture when you're working day to day. And I think that's something that doesn't really get talked about enough, and with entrepreneurs.
What are some important qualities and skills that you think separate successful entrepreneurs from those who fail? And when I say fail, I don't mean a learning failure, but I mean a completely giving up failure.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to speak too much on success because I'm still trying to get there. But what I found has allowed me to make progress, I'll say, and maybe has stopped some other people that I've seen, is the ability and sort of like the acceptance of just doing something. I think it's completely underrated to just go and like try to make a sale or try to talk to a prospective developer if you're trying to build a technology platform, or try to talk to an investor, schedule a meeting, make a pitch deck, do a pitch competition. Some people really struggle. I think most people really struggle actually making that first step for whatever reason, and there's a lot of totally valid reasons. But if you really want to create a business, I mean, it's totally self-motivated. Most people are, you might have some friends that are like, yeah, that's awesome, yeah, but at the end of the day, it's just you, and your co-founders, I guess, if you have them. But like being able to just take that step, and do the next thing that needs to be done, I think that's like the most important thing that people should focus on if they're trying to get going.
Definitely agree with that. The first step is the hardest step, but taking it is also the most important. And it also might be a little bit of a lonely journey, right? I think putting yourself out there right away, like you're talking about, is 100% the hardest thing for people to do, because it's kind of embracing a vulnerability, right? You're putting yourself out there for something that you really enjoy or you really believe in, and it's opening the door for everyone else out there to not believe in it and not like what you're doing and want you to do something else because that's not the person that they thought you were. And I think that step is obviously extremely difficult, but I think everyone who's ever built something that they really truly believe in and love and made an impact had to go through that first step at some time or another. So I do think it is a necessary one, and it is definitely a necessary quality and skill for a successful entrepreneur. Yep. So, Chad, moving on from that a little bit, now I want you to give some advice. Put yourself in the shoes of maybe someone who you're going to be humble, and say you don't have a ton of wisdom, you don't have as much experience, which we're obviously young, but put yourself in the place as if what you know now is a lot of knowledge. What kind of advice would you give to an entrepreneur who's just starting out and has a fear of failure in the beginning and just a fear of the unknown?
Yeah, I mean, it is scary. It's not something that I or I think anyone has really, completely worked through or maybe ever will. We're conditioned to try not to fail. Failure is not good. Like, you don't want to just start a business with the intention to fail, just to fail and even just to like learn something. Although to some degree that's, what I've done in the past just to kind of, get going with something. But, you want to try not to fail, but you also have to realize that, if you take some sort of like a managed risk with a business, failure, failing the business, let's say, there's a lot of ways you can define failure, but let's define failure as your business, ceasing to exist. Maybe you run out of money. That's usually what, gets people. Maybe there's no market demand. Let's call that a failure and say, if you fail in that regard, really the only thing that's going to come out of it is positives. The amount of things I've learned from this last business has been incredible. And I'm better off starting the next one, whether or not this business is successful or not. And just like knowing that, and it's something that I think it's one of those things that you know intuitively and you hear all the time, and people will hear from me and just be like, yeah, that's right, like awesome. But you really got to go through it yourself to realize it's true. Um, and I think that just comes from doing. You got to do something and then just see what happens. If it works, it works. If not, just have the mindset going in that if it doesn't work out, that's going to be okay. And this is actually something that I know the 4 Hour Work Week talks about. Spoiler alert if you haven't gone there yet. But it's like, like picture like the worst thing that could possibly happen if you fail, and then realize that right off the bat, that's the worst case scenario. It probably is not going to happen. And then what is the worst case scenario? You die, your business fails and you die. That's probably like, to me, that's like the worst case scenario I could think of. And then it's like, dude, I died. My business is no longer existing. Well, who cares? Like, I mean, I don't want to die, but like, no, you see what I'm saying? Like the worst case scenario itself usually isn't that bad. And most of the time it's like the worst case scenario is, okay, I'm embarrassed publicly because all my friends saw me fail. And that's more like a personal thing, right? And I still have that. I still get negative feedback about things that, it sucks to get and hurts me, but you gotta just kind of learn to shake it off and know that you're definitely capable of doing, what you set your mind to. And you just gotta, I think you really just gotta do stuff and just learn that for yourself. Yes.
Definitely. I think it ties in well to that number one skill you said, which is essentially taking that first step and just putting yourself out there and doing something. And also what you were talking about as far as failure goes, viewing that what's the worst possible thing that could happen? Taking death out of it, because death would probably happen either way, whether you did the business or not, barring it's not something that's, extremely dangerous. But what's the worst thing that's going to happen? It fails. I lost some time, and now I get fired from my job, or I quit my job and I go back and start working for a competitor or the same company. You know what I mean? Like that's how he describes it. He's like, if it wouldn't have worked out for me, then I would have gone back and started working for the same company again because I was a good employee, or for someone else. But I would have known deep down that I gave it a shot. And I think that's what a lot of people set themselves up into a position where they can't even do that, or don't choose not to do that, think they can't do that, and then they never actually really give it that shot. And as an entrepreneur, I think that's what separates you, is you're someone, whether you're successful or not, you're someone that went for it. And another thing, you define failure as, the business ceasing to exist, which I think is a very true, literal definition of failure for the business. But you also said that you can learn a lot from that. So I think you almost don't even, or shouldn't even, maybe, it depends on the context, view that as failure, and view failure simply as not starting, not trying, or giving up halfway through when there is still potential. Because obviously, I mean, if you give up on something that's already dead, you're not really giving up on it, right? But one thing that I've heard talked about as well, I heard it from Hormozy, but it wasn't him originally who said it, is a guy who was selling, he was at the end of like a sales pitch, or was the closing of his speech or something. He asked a member of the audience, would you invest? And the answer was no. And his response was, why? And the response then was, because I don't have enough money. And he goes, okay, what's your salary right now? And the reply was 50,000. Okay, 50,000. He's like, do you know how long have you been working in that space? And she was, X amount of time. And it's like, okay, you're costing yourself $950,000 a year not knowing how to make $1 million. And that might sound super dumb to someone that hears that. Well, like, duh, or that's not every situation's the same. Obviously not, right? But if you say that making money is a skill, and there's some luck involved, but I think a lot of people would say that making more money correlates with certain skills. And okay, so if you're extremely skilled, you'd be able to figure out a way to eventually get to $1 million, or at least be working towards that in a year. Then I think you could be arguing the point that you are costing yourself X amount of money by not knowing how to make $1 million, right? Whatever the difference is between your current salary and that. And obviously that's far out there. I surely don't make $1 million. I'm costing myself right now as we speak that. But I think that concept is definitely an interesting one to ponder on as well. How about failure in your particular journey? What's the biggest failure you've actually experienced that has taught you some major life lessons?
Yeah. First, I'll say, like, add on to all that. I think failure is self-defined, and what I mean by that is, you might look at what I've done or haven't done as a failure, but if I don't look at it as a failure, then it's not a failure, at least from my perspective. And so, looking at everything in life or trying to get over that hurdle of failure, I think the answer is just to change your perspective on it and know that if you don't think it's a failure, then how is it a failure? It's a failure to other people, but who cares, right? My biggest failure, if I were to define it as that, um, I think it's ultimately, and I think this is true of a lot of people. It's not what we did, it's what we didn't do. And you sort of said this a little bit, earlier. For me, it's not doing a lot of things. Like I was really interested in, like programming and computer science when I was like probably 12, 13. And I really wanted to create an app and I really wanted to create a technology business. I was just like too lazy to like actually follow through with it and continue to do it. And I took a number of attempts trying to get there, but I just gave up for whatever reason. And none of them were valid reasons. It was all just like, I could feel it myself. I just like, and I'm way too lazy to do this. Um, and that I think is probably, where my biggest failures lie, at least like a professional side is, not doing things for any reason, for no reason other than just, I didn't, I wanted to do them, but I just didn't do them. And I knew not doing them that I was letting my future self down. So I've tried to fix that a little bit. I'm trying to relearn it again. Gotten farther than I have in the past, but we'll see if that cycle persists. I sure hope not.
What's something, Chad, that you wish you'd have known starting out in your entrepreneurship journey? And we may have covered it already, but to reiterate that now and you would tell your past self.
Yeah. I started my entrepreneurship journey when I was like probably like, I don't know, 8 or something. So I'd probably be a quadrillionaire by now if I, knew what I knew then. But I think it's I think one of the most important things that I've learned recently is scale, and thinking of your business through the terms of scale, and also like thinking big. And those two sort of go together. For a long time I was just kind of like trying to make money and like try to get to the next step or make this much more money or hit this milestone. And I hit some pretty cool milestones that I was working towards for a long time. But what I started to realize is that, it's not that much harder, I don't think, to create $1 billion business than it is to, make $50,000 a year. Obviously, that might, I haven't gone anywhere near that. I haven't actually raised money at this point. But like the principle of it is like, there's people that are like my dad poured concrete, for example. He'd work like 40 to 60 hours a week. He hated it during, we get in Wisconsin up here, it's like negative 20, 30 degrees. And he's out there pouring concrete, doing whatever he's doing. I don't know if he can pour concrete negative 30, but it might freeze. But, he's working on his hands and knees for 40 years. You can't tell me that's easier work than, a technology startup of some sort. And what sort of looking at it through that perspective taught me is if you can find something that scales, a really big market or a really good business model, it's the same process. It's getting from 0 to 1 and then 1 to infinity. That's all it is. That's all you're trying to do, no matter what business you're doing, what market you're in, what your goals or ambitions are. If you want to make something big, you can make it big. You just have to have all the right, you have to have all the right ingredients. but I think that was probably like one of the most interesting things that I've learned going through like the startup process over the last year is, you know, it's free to think big, and your big ideas are going to attract a lot more interest anyway. So yeah, I'd go with those.
Yeah, and tying in with that is just, we've said it before, but I want to hit on it again, is the importance of taking that first step and
Mm-hmm.
giving it a shot, because if you don't ever do that, you will never end up with, like you said, the actual difficulty of pouring concrete, like hard physical labor, versus a startup company of any sort. Yeah, it's not more difficult, but you have
Mm-hmm.
to, there's some sacrifices you have to make with it, obviously. And there's people that are in different situations, obviously. But if you're in that position and if you really want it, it is something that you will have to do, is take that first step. And then just, I love what you said about 0 to 1 and 1 to infinity, because that's what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not making money to making money. And then how do I make more money? And earlier you mentioned, making more money. I can't remember how you worded it, but scaling it like efficiently. So first you make the money, then you make it better margins, you make it more efficiently, and then you scale it to massive size, right? Essentially, that's how it works. And
Yeah.
I think that's a really smart way of looking at it. And another question I want to ask you, Chad, is how do you set and prioritize financial goals, both personally and within your company, for the short term and then also over the long term?
Yeah. So short term for both of them, I guess, is spend as little as possible. I'm just, I think, naturally more conservative with my money. I've never been a big spender. I was just kind of like, why the heck am I even trying to make money in the first place if I'm not going to use it? But um, I really see business as like, you know, it's going to cost me. Like the opportunity cost of that dollar that I could have put in, to the business is a lot higher than a dollar. If you look at like, I like to play around with the compound interest calculators online, and that dollar is going to be kind of crazy in like 40 years. And so to me, it pains me to spend like $50 on something when that money could just have so much more impact down the line. Um, so my philosophy is definitely spend as little as possible, at least now. My sort of like I've always thought of it like when I have like a bunch of cash in the bank or invested, obviously, um, then my returns can pay for my lifestyle. That's sort of the point I want to get to, where the initial nest egg isn't being affected at all. But I'm not there yet. So until I get there, it's definitely going to just be grow, 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 and keep growing. And I don't need anything. I don't need a car, a nice car. I mean, my chances of being a homicide victim are probably higher driving a Ferrari than a different car anyway. So it's like it's totally not necessary. And the more you really think about it, like the reason why I used to want like really nice cars and nice clothes and shoes and everything. Um, it's like, why do I want those things? It's not half the time. It's not even for me. And so yeah, that's like my whole thing is like, I don't know, I like to spend as little as possible and invest as much as possible, and then just like try to build something awesome with it.
What's the meaning of life to you, Chad?
Yeah, that's a good question. I hope you ask everyone that. Um, I don't know what the meaning of life is, and I'm taking a philosophy class right now, and I don't know if I can, in good faith, answer that question. I'm not sure if there's a meaning to life, and I do know that if you don't look too much into the question, that you can kind of create your own meaning. Um, and that's one thing like that's awesome about philosophy is you don't really there's no like hard truth in terms of what's true and what's not. Um, and so yeah, create your own meaning of life and make sure it's make sure you can look back at it and be proud of it.
I love that too. Chad, where do you see yourself in 5 years, both personal development wise, and then also wrapping up with business wise?
Yeah. So personally, so I don't know if I have any. I should have some hard set goals. I think that's a very important piece of reaching anything that I found is setting those goals. Everyone will talk about that, but um, I really want to just like do more stuff and enjoy life more. And I spent a lot of time, for the last like 4 years just grinding. And I want to get to a point where I can find a little more balance. And work-life balance is something that I don't think any of us are ever going to figure out. Um, but trying to get better at that is what I'm going to try to strive to do over the next 5 years. And, just like having more fun with people that I really care about and, enjoying the time. Like I'm in school right now for a couple more years and I know once I'm out, I'll never be able to come back realistically. So enjoying that time now, and just being mindful of it. In terms of business, one of my goals, like my actual tangible goals, is to be venture backed. And I'm not sure if that's this startup or the next one, but I'd like to actually raise, a significant amount of money, um, and actually have a startup with a team, a big team. I think it's definitely attainable. I think once we work a little more on proving our product fit, we'll probably try to start raising money, and I'm looking forward to that process.
I think that's a great goal to have. And I think that ties in well with what we originally started talking about here, which was kind of the purpose of your business as a whole and what you want to do with it. And Chad, I like the way you think. I think you got a good head on your shoulders.
Appreciate it.
You got some good values, and I think you have the right character, really mindset, what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur going forward. And I'm wishing you nothing but the best. Thank you very much for coming on this podcast. The time absolutely flew by. I feel like we could have done this for 3 hours.
It was a lot of
Um,
fun.
appreciate it, man, and wishing you the best.